Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just happy to be here. I just appreciate the opportunity. And I'm going to start with prayer because that's what I normally do. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you for allowing me to use you as a vessel, Lord. I know I'm on assignment through you, Lord, and I just ask you to decrease me to increase you, that we may save lives and change minds. I want to thank Reverend Neil for, I keep them on all the time. Oh, yeah. Is that okay? I always keep them on. I just want to thank Reverend Neil for the opportunity for allowing me to be on this pulpit. So I just want to start with just really saying that things have actually changed drastically since I was first asked to come and bring the sermon today. The world is no longer as we once knew it. COVID-19 has basically ravaged our communities. People are scared, they're concerned, confined, isolated, and now they're actually questioning what's going on, what's happening next in our lives. And it came quickly. We had no time to get things together. So as a nation, we're actually scrambling. We're trying to get tests, masks, respirators, gloves, beds, etc. Sadly, we were not properly prepared. There were warnings, but we did not take heed. We were not prepared. We thought we could handle it on our own. So now we are paying the price because preparation for a situation or crisis does not mitigate or erase the event from occurring. It just allows us to handle it more effectively. So I ask yourself, as we're going in to this conversation around sexuality, have we properly prepared ourselves or our congregations for this situation? If we don't realize or accept that we are all sexual beings and sexuality is an intricate part of our lives, we will continue to be caught off guard and not properly prepared for normal and sometimes abnormal everyday situations. Have we prepared our youth? They're home for a long period of time right now. Have we taught them about the dangers of sexting and social media safety? Have we prepared our couples, our partners, our husbands and wives to basically communicate effectively, to talk about their wants, needs, and desires? Or are we setting them up for arguments through this time of being isolated? Have we talked to our singles? Have we talked to the people who are sitting at home looking for love and affection? Have we taught them how to love themselves and sit and read their word and just embrace themselves? Or are they on dating sites or social media apps looking for self-acceptance and love? Today's topic is sexuality has been added to the spirituality menu. My message is, I'm not settling. If I eat, I need to be nourished. So imagine for a moment that you had a rough week, like most of us have had at work, and you promised yourself some self-care for the weekend. So you're going to this brand new restaurant that just opened up. You are excited. You've planned it all week. You didn't eat all day because you wanted to save your appetite for this meal. You wanted to get filled there. So you get there and you excitedly open up the menus. So they have one side that's a prefix, and the other side is the normal menu. So you look at it, and either side, doesn't really have what you want, but you're like, okay, I'm going to adapt. I'm going to be okay. So you ask the waiter to come over, and you say, hey, on this prefix side, I see that the side is a starch. I'm not really eating starches. Can I substitute it for a vegetable? And he looks at you and smiles and said, sorry, no substitutions on that prefix menu. So you take a deep breath and you say, okay, well, on the regular menu, I see it comes with two sides, and both of them, seem okay, but you know what? I would really like two vegetables because, again, I'm not eating starches and stuff. And he says, okay, but you know what? It's going to be an upcharge. So you're like, okay, so it's two menus here. Neither of them have what I want, but you know what? All right, just bring me the meal as is. So I eat the meal, and I realized that I ate it because I was hungry, but I wasn't satisfied. I settled. How many times do we settle with the menu that's put before us because it's either an add-on or an addition or substitution? In our conversation today, the verse that I'm using for sexuality has been added to the spirituality menu is, don't withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is your power to do it. And that's from Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, the 27th verse. Throughout this conversation, I am going to add verses because whenever we talk about sexuality, it seems that the religious side seems to always go back and forth with you. Sometime in the world, we can kind of navigate these conversations. So I'm just going to throw out some verses for people to have some ammunition when they're trying to add some stuff to their menu. Integration and isolation of sexuality are a key component that we will be examining today. Integration of sexuality creates growth and nourishment. But the isolation, on the other hand, causes deterioration and starvation. So if I don't have what I need, I'm not being nourished, and I'm not settling for that anymore. So let's define spirituality because we all know what that is. So that we'll start with something comfortable. So spirituality is the term that's most comfortable discussing our spirituality and our connection to the spirit, our non-physical aspects of self. It really gives us a purpose for our human lives. So as churches and congregations, there are several themes that are ritualistically embedded in our weekly sermons. And for the sake of this message, I'm going to say there are normal, regular menu items. There is sure to be offered every time you come in to dine, no add-ons, no specialty. You systematically enter into the doors week after week to quench your thirst and satisfy your hunger from this menu of sermons. For instance, when we think of the book of Genesis, what do we usually think about as far as our appetizer and our entrees? Creation. He made light and day, darkness, waters and seas, animals, planets, Adam, Eve, the Garden of Eden. We can go on. But what else do you realize? Because now I'm going to add on some stuff. Right at the beginning of time, God is intentional about adding sexuality to the menu. It wasn't a special dish or add-on. But it's surprising how infrequently bishops, ministers, rabbis, or pastors talk about the messages of sexuality in the scriptures when they're everywhere. The Bible actually starts off with an affirmation of humans as sexual beings. In the first account of the creation in Genesis 1:27, he said he made human beings in his image. And in an image of God, he created them. And he made them male and female. Then he tells us what? To go have sex and procreate. Just like that. In Genesis 1:28, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Right at the beginning, God had added sex to the menu. Now, sexuality can be defined as a central aspect of being human throughout our life. It encompasses our sex, gender, identities and roles, our sexual orientation, our pleasure, our intimacy, and reproduction. Sexuality is actually experienced through our thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, practices, roles, and relationships. So with all that, I'm not settling anymore. I need to be nourished. Don't just try to feed me anything off of your menu. How many of you have checked your menu lately? Are they meeting the needs of today's society? Are you feeding the entire body or just a segmented portion because of your levels of comfortability in preparing these tantalizing sexuality-related dishes? Remember, being fed or eating or satisfying a hunger is not synonymous with being properly nourished. I can go out and eat all types of food because I'm hungry, but was my body actually satisfied? I don't want to eat. I need to be nourished. So seemingly man has conveniently opted out of adding sexuality to the menu as an addition, because the central component of sexuality is emphasized in this verse. Hence, a man leaves his mother and father and clings to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Genesis 2:24. You know that's sex, right? The goal of union is sexual pleasure and procreation is actually not mentioned in this part, which is the second count of creation. The misconceptions around sexuality and acknowledging it as a normal, natural part of life within the parameters of mutual consent are completely overlooked most of the time in our religious societies, as well as the total omission of, I'm going to say it, pleasure from conversations. Unfortunately, it's more acceptable to actually systematically focus on the risks and harms by sex-shaming people into hopefully thinking about not doing it at all, which we all know is harmful and erroneous. I'm not settling anymore. How many of you need to eat to be nourished? So it amazes me that as a society, we've become so progressive in so many areas when we're talking about women's rights and human rights and reproductive rights sometimes. But sometimes sexuality-related topics are considered taboo and heavily stigmatized. Our churches and our communities have to stop feeding our parishioners sexuality appetizers, but withholding the entire entree. We have become very comfortable tackling idea or a concept, but not addressing the whole issue. For example, many congregations, churches, and communities will perform HIV/AIDS testing, but they don't incorporate sexual health workshops and conversations about high-risk behaviors or attitudes. Provide reliable sources to services such as PrEP. Churches have even discussed human trafficking. Why? Because they really don't want to say what it is in most of our communities. It's sex trafficking. And they don't acknowledge the reality of the low self-esteem, self-hatred that these young people feel as a result of the lewd sexual actions that they actually had to perform, and the feelings that they've experienced in these activities, which makes them feel unwanted and unvalued, but we're not creating the space to allow them to talk about it. Churches may embrace the Me Too movement, have congregational get-togethers and protests, but they don't sit there and educate the congregation about rape culture, consent, and bodily autonomy. So I have a story I want to share with you. A gentleman heard about our end-period poverty movement and reached out to us for us to attend actually a STEM and engineering program for underprivileged youth. It was first for boys and girls because they wanted to provide free resources for these young people to basically be able to succeed. And he shared with me that he had grown up in economic hardships with just his mother and realized the financial burden associated with purchasing feminine hygiene products. We joyfully agreed to attend the event, but sadly, a couple of days before the event, he called and said, when he presented the idea to a group of women in leadership at the energy company, they said it was inappropriate because it was unbecoming for pads and tampons to be in an event, and that is something that should not be distributed in public. This was a private matter. Now I thought to myself, who would really be embarrassed? Is it the young people who would be embarrassed? Or was this group of women who are not comfortable with the menses? You want to encourage them to be confident young ladies and reach their dreams, but you can't embrace the very nature of what makes them a woman. You wouldn't be here if we didn't have it, right? Okay, let me just say that, okay. These items actually might be a barrier for them attending the event, going to school, and actually their overall success. So it's ironic, when I posted it on social media, some of the reactions I got was that, well, Lynette, what do you think? The menses is nasty. No one wants to talk about it. It's just not a pleasant topic, all the way back to biblical times. I don't just need to be fed, I need to be nourished. So I said, okay, so shame and stigma are learned behaviors passed down through a series of misconceptions, mistruths, especially about the woman's body and the menses. So, what I never hear in congregations as we're talking about this menu that we always go to, I never hear anything about Leviticus, the 15th chapter, the first verse, about the Lord speaking to Moses and Aaron saying, "Speak to your children of Israel and say to them, When any man has a discharge from his body, it is unclean, and this shall be uncleanliness in regard to his discharge, whether his body runs the discharge or his body is stopped by the discharge. He is unclean. Every bed is unclean to which he has discharge lies, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. And whosoever touches his bed, washes clothes, and bathe in water shall be unclean until the evening. I never heard that, but we're adding it to the menu. Another verse I never heard, but I'm adding it to the menu. Leviticus, the 15th chapter, the 16th verse starting. If a man has an emission of, and I'm going to use the word semen, then he shall wash his body in water and be unclean until evening. And any garment and any leather to which the semen touches shall be washed, and he is unclean until the evening. Also, when a woman lies with a man and there is an emission of semen, they shall both bathe in water and be unclean until the evening. But what I do hear all the time, because it's an everyday addition to the menu, is about women. If a woman has discharge and the discharge from her body is blood, then she shall be set apart for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything that she lies on through her impurity shall be unclean. Also, everything she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed or washes her clothes should bathe in water and be unclean till evening. I'm not happy about that wasn't normally added to the menu, because we live in a misogynistic society where patriarchy has made women feel as though they're not important and they're not valued. These intentional oversights of information have caused generations of women to feel ungodly, undesirable, and unclean. And I'm not dealing with it anymore, and I'm not settling. We need to add these important conversations, because if you really look at the verses and the way they were presented, it was really about proper hygiene. It was really about cleaning your body and taking care of it. So it wasn't just that women were unclean. Anybody who had any type of discharge or anything coming out of their body was unclean. And then in the other verse of Leviticus, it talked about the periods or menses lasting for more than 7 days, which was telling you that you had an irregular period and something was wrong with you. So these are the conversations we're not having, because what? We're not adding sexuality to the spirituality menu. Understanding and embracing your body in totality allows you to show vulnerability. It allows you to touch and be touched, loved and give love, which is the fundamental foundational property of having a healthy relationship, not only with others, but with yourself. So I'm imploring all bodies of religion to add 5 components of sexuality onto your menu. There was an idea that Dr. Dennis Daly created, which are the circles of sexuality. The first one is sexualization, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. Sexualization is basically the use of your body to manipulate others through seduction and sexual harassment. So that concept has to do with bodily autonomy. And one of the conversations I need you to tell your parishioners and understand is that privacy is not something people in poverty understand. When you're in systems, you're constantly telling everybody about your business. So for me to protect my privacy is not something that's innate in me. So sometimes I make decisions based on my lack of bodily autonomy. Sexual identity is a sense of self and my being. Basically, it includes my gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender roles. Our identities are our own. And when you force people to live and operate in a way that's uncomfortable or foreign to them, self-hatred happens. You put them in a box. And when you close a box on somebody, what happens? They smother and they die. Sexual health and sexual reproduction, which is often the foundation of sexuality education, covers all the basic understandings about contraceptive, fertility, menopause, menstruation, and sexually transmitted infections. But again, we haven't added it to the menu, just like in Leviticus when we talked about discharges, and also about Genesis when God says, be fruitful and multiply. Now, intimacy, I really like this one because it describes the need for people to be close to one another. We need someone to be close to. We need to have it reciprocated. So even at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, God was displeased the first time because he recognized it is not good for man to be alone. So he sets out to find what? Adam a what? Companion. So it's already in the Bible that we want to be connected to somebody. So he brings animals forward to Adam and he suggests None of them is his companion. He rejects them. And the only thing that God can do is put Adam to sleep and create women. So this natural need to feel close to somebody is really something that we need to understand. And the last one is sensuality. Sensuality. This is the need for someone to accept our body and our identity. It has to do with our body image, autonomy, skin hunger, and attraction. And what verse comes to mind is really when Jacob, his first sight of Rachel, because he thought she was so beautiful. But on the other side, he thought Leah wasn't so beautiful, remember, because she had the issues with her eye. How we feel about ourselves and how we perceive our identities and how we think the world perceives us dictates how we make healthy decisions. If I don't like and value myself, I'm not going to make healthy decisions. Adding sexuality to the spirituality menu is imperative to the positive development of individuals and congregations. Church members can no longer dismiss conversations or discussions about healthy, positive sexuality and then criticize or shame subsequent negative choices and behaviors. We know that true learning actually takes place when realistic relational information is presented so persons can engage in an evolved process. Our sexuality is part of who we are. It's delicately woven into every fiber of our being. It contributes to everything we think, do, and say throughout the day. The Bible, ironically, emphasizes the equality of men and women. He displays us side by side. He recognizes we need companions and helpers in life. That's why he created a helpmate. But you know what? He affirms sexuality as both a procreative way and a recreative way. And he highlights that God is pleased to offer mankind this offering. So I'm asking you today, are you settling? Do you have a prefix menu in your congregation? Is it take it how it is, no substitutions? Do you have an everyday menu that when we walk in, we're going to get the same old food every day? Or do you have one of those menus where everything's an add-on, like, okay, for you to get this, you have to do this? So take this time to evaluate. Are you feeding your congregation when they're hungry? Or are you actually nourishing them? Because I'm no longer settling. I don't just want to eat. I need to be nourished. Amen.